Thank you very much, Steffi, and great to see all of you. It's a privilege to be here. Peter, welcome. Great to see you. So we had a very exciting panel yesterday on autonomous cars and the future mobility services, and Peter's colleague at BMW, Klaus, promised everybody that in only 4 years, in 2021, we will be able to buy a fully autonomous car, which I am tremendously excited about. So fortunately, Peter is going to give us the details on that. So Peter, does that mean that in 4 years, we can all walk into a BMW dealership and buy a car that we don't need to drive, can take us anywhere all around the world?
I think on the technology side, definitely yes. We are preparing to bring this technology to the market in 2021. And you rightfully said it's only 4 years, so it's basically tomorrow. The other question is, how is it going to be utilized, this technology? Are we as a society, are we as individuals ready to embrace this kind of technology? It's a completely different discussion. So in my opinion, long term, let's say 10, 15 years, I think you will see, at least in the urban environment, definitely autonomous driving. I think that the ramp-up curve, starting in 2021 to, let's say, 2030, will be slow.
And I can say I was given a ride in an autonomous vehicle relatively recently, which was a great experience, and I found that you get used to it in about 1 minute, and you think the car should always drive everywhere. And this was a company in the United States that believes that the first instance of the autonomous vehicle will be in a city, and it will be on a very carefully prescribed route. It will not be you can go wherever you want. Is that what you think, how you think it will work out as well?
I think the first step, and this we are very close to introduce, is the first step of autonomous driving will be the parking side of it. It's, I think, at least for me, it's a quite painful process to go to a big parking garage, to drive around and look for an open spot. So I think this will be the first step. You leave your car at the door and the car parks itself and it comes back whenever you need it. The second step is what you just mentioned. It's in certain defined areas within a city, preferable with no pedestrians and no people on bicycles, because they are quite dangerous, because they don't follow the rules very often, as we all experience. So until the car really learns that there are other people on the street who are not following the rules, this will take a little bit longer. So yes, I think the first you will see autonomous driving in certain areas within certain cities, where we all can start to learn more about how it really functions in real life and not only virtually.
And what about highways? If you go back to the airlines, autopilot first came in for when the plane was at level flight. You switch on the autopilot, that's where it can take care. Now we have planes that completely fly themselves from the terminal to the terminal. Is that another place that we may see it, is on the highway? You get on a big highway with very good maps and you can switch on autonomous?
Yeah, I think you will see it on highways. I mean, especially I lived quite a long time in the US, so driving on US highways with 55 miles is not the most exciting thing on earth. So I think you will see autonomous driving on the highway. Because also you have to understand that on highways it's relatively easy to do it, because there is not these distractions I mentioned before. So yes, highways for cars, for trucks, it will come pretty soon.
And you believe that not so much in 4 years, but in 10 to 15 years, when it's extremely common. First of all, is that when we should all really expect that autonomy will be everywhere? Is 10 to 15 years, is that the right time frame?
I think, as I mentioned before, when you have a technology ready to get into the market by 2021, it probably will take 10, 15 years to fully implement it. And even fully implemented, I would not say that you will see it everywhere. I mean, you will see it definitely in big urban environments. I don't think that we are going to see autonomous driving in mainland US or mainland China, or also in big parts of Europe, where people still will have their own car to be able to mobile. But yes, around urban environments, I would say around about 2030, you will see a lot of autonomous driving.
And you think this will begin to change society in some very profound ways. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think, I follow, of course, very closely the public discussion about the technology of autonomous driving. And I think it's time now for us as a society to also start the discussion, what does this technology mean for us? Mean for us individually, but also what does it mean for us as a society? How does it change maybe our society? Because we all are talking about this big mega trend of urbanization. More and more people are moving to cities. If you really try to analyze why most of these people are moving to cities, it's because a lot of them are saying the pain point of commuting every day into the city and at night out of the city with stop and go all the time. The pain point is so big that people are starting to move into the city. Now, what's happening when in most big cities around the world, prices are skyrocketing. So a lot of people are starting to say, I can't afford anymore to live in a big city. So if you would imagine now, let's jump really into 2030 and we have full autonomous technology available. Why couldn't we think about to reverse this trend of urbanization? Because when all of a sudden the commute is not a pain point anymore, you sit in your car, you have time to do whatever you want. So we could even see a reverse of this trend of urbanization with autonomous driving. And I think, honestly, we should start a broader discussion within the society what this technology really means, because I don't think it's totally clear to everybody.
And you've also talked about, and BMW is actually working on a sharing service. A lot of the US companies are already working about that, and talking about becoming mobility services companies rather than car manufacturers. So what do you, in 2030, what do you think the landscape will look like? Will we own cars? Will we belong to an autonomous car collective? Will we all be Uber customers? How does it all work?
I think also this kind of discussion for me is always too much the one or the other. I think you still, at least in 2030, I am totally convinced you still will have both things in the market. I think you still will have a lot of people who are going to want to own their own car. But yes, I definitely think, especially in the urban environment, to own a car will not be really important anymore, because you are going to have mobility everywhere and whenever you want to have it. It's a little bit like water. You open it and water comes. And I think this is what's going to happen with mobility. And I also think that in 2030, you will not, like now, you push a button and mobility comes to you. I think by 2030 we are so far that you even don't have to push the button anymore, because we know exactly your mobility, your personal mobility needs, and mobility will come to you whenever you need it. So I think that this change will happen over a time period of 10 years.
And building on that, you've mentioned before you don't think it's either or. You think it will be all of these things that we do. Similarly, in our individual cars, will we sometimes be driving ourselves and sometimes be switching on autonomous or autopilot? Because I remember actually having a conversation with someone on the BMW team a few years ago, and she said, you know, one thing that we already know is that our cars are already better drivers than people. And she said, that's great. On the other hand, it's a problem because we are the ultimate driving machine, not the ultimate riding machine. And we want to also keep the excitement of driving. And so will we be switching back and forth? Is that the way to think about it?
I think that the discussion about do we need a steering wheel or not, for me, is really totally overrated. It's not an important technology question, because the consumer, if a consumer in 2030 still wants to have, for whatever reason, a steering wheel, that's the easy part of autonomous driving. We'll give him a steering wheel. And I personally think that by 2030, you still will have a big portion of people who are going to want to have a steering wheel. And this is why we, in our autonomous project, we are planning to offer both possibilities so that you as a consumer can choose depending on the situation. You know, and I always tell people when I say, well, what about the driving pleasure, you know? And I always ask people, well, where is driving pleasure today? I mean, who has pleasure in driving every morning in stop and go, 5 meters stopping? Where is the pleasure? So we are taking away this pain point and we are keeping the pleasure part. So if you want to go out on a weekend on a nice drive, because this is what you do for a hobby or for enjoying or for relaxing, whatever your personal reasons are, why not give this opportunity also to consumers to continue to do this? So we are open in both directions. Whenever you need autonomous, you can have it by a push of a button, but if you still want to drive, that's fine with us too.
And so over the next 4 years, before you roll out the first fully autonomous car that you're selling, what are the big problems that have to be solved? What do you have to do? And I'll give you an example. In the ride that I was given in an autonomous car by a US car company recently, we did go out into the streets. We weren't on a safety track. And as I said before, you get used to it in 1 minute. You think it's absurd that you would have to drive. The car is doing an excellent job. It's very safe. It's stopping. And there was one case where a pedestrian walked across. Car stopped perfectly and waited. Then there was another case where there was an unplanned pedestrian walking across. Car stopped perfectly. And then the pedestrian went like this. You go. And I said, what's going to happen? And the person who was sitting in the front said, well, if he doesn't walk, we are going to be here for a very long time because the car does not understand this. So little things like that, in my understanding, are actually very difficult to build into the technology. So what are some of the hurdles that you have over the next 4 years?
Yeah, I think you mentioned already the biggest hurdle. I think all that sensors and all this, we know more or less how to cope with it. It's more about these little things. You just gave one example, which is of course extremely difficult to teach a robot to understand this. Because on one hand, we all grew up, and sometimes in traffic, you know, just by looking at each other, we know, well, we can go now because he's going to stop. So the robot doesn't know this. So we have to start to teach. To take your example, this movement, a robot will understand this in several years. Not today, but we know already how this is going to work. It goes so far that the robot will understand that if you, as a pedestrian, if you stand there and you move a little bit your body forward, the likelihood that you're going to make a step on the street is very high. So the car is going to stop. So all this is in development and will be possible. The toughest part is that you can, of course, only teach the robot to be, of course, legally on the street. Now, let's be honest in here. How often are we overstepping legal boundaries in traffic just to get it moving? You know, you have a a full line in the middle, you have a truck standing there, and in theory, you would need to stand behind this truck. You cannot overpass this line. So we as humans, we look around the truck and say, oh, okay, it's free, let me go. And we keep the traffic moving. So the robot cannot do this because he is programmed, he has to fulfill, of course, all legal requirements. And this means I cannot pass this. So this is the case you mentioned a little bit. This car, and it happened already several times with some other companies as well, of course, who are testing in real traffic. This car would stand forever behind this truck until the truck moves again. So in this transition period where you have probably for many, many years, I call it stupid cars and intelligent cars on the street, we probably will need to implement a kind of tele-traffic system. So whenever we see a situation where the car stopped, but it would be reasonable to continue, somebody will interfere with the car and will drive it around this truck so that the traffic keeps moving. So I think this part is the biggest challenge. The other challenge I would mention, I am not sure, I mean, you just said you got used to it after 1 minute. I am not so sure if the big majority of people will get used so quickly to it. So we are also working with a lot of psychologists around the world. What does it really mean to give up control? Because this is for us human extremely difficult. You know, I mean, you can see it in the airline industry. A modern Airbus could fly easily without a pilot. Would we enter this plane without a pilot? Probably not. It's a psychology barrier. So I think this is one thing we have to dig even more into it. What does this mean to us as individuals to give up this control, to hand over your life to a robot? I don't think it's so easy as you just mentioned.
And so, but you are a marketing genius. So from a marketing perspective, how do you get people comfortable with that?
I think, and especially in Germany, as always, you know, we Germans look for the problems and not for the opportunities. I see huge opportunities with autonomous driving. On one hand, it will become much more safe on the streets. Let's face it, we humans make a lot of mistakes driving around. So 95% of all accidents around the world is caused by human behavior. So the autonomous vehicle will help us in the safety area a lot. It will become much more safer. Will it always work perfectly? No, we will always have the one or the other problem. But in general, the system will be much safer. This is one point. The other point is, I think we are going to give a big portion of our society, the elderly people, the mobility aspect back to their lives. Right now, and our society is getting older and older, right now, at a certain age, you stop to drive, or at least you should stop to drive yourself. And this means that you are stuck at home. Yeah, you need help, support from other people, which is not very nice for these elderly people. So with autonomous driving, we could give back to a big portion of our society the complete mobility again, because you just push a button and pick it up, and you get picked up. The other part, and this is now more on the social side, you know, I mean, how often do we all go out at night, you have a nice dinner, fantastic wine, and after the first glass, we all say, can't drink anymore because I have to drive. Can you imagine a world where this is disappearing? You can have your second glass of wine because you have the robot driving you home. So there are a lot of huge advantages for the system. for us as individuals, for us as society, it's technology-wise feasible, and this is why I'm so convinced it will come.
So self-driving cars are going to be very good for the restaurant and beer and wine industry, which is very good. And does anyone have any questions for Peter? I have several more, but if want to give you some time as well, if you do.
They're all dreaming now about this autonomous world going out at night.
The question is whether, Peter, you can comment on the trolley problem, and I'm afraid I'm going to now need that explained to me. Yes, this is an interesting philosophical question that is often discussed, at least in the United States, which is if the robot driver perceives a situation where it could continue and kill 5 people, or change the course of the car and kill 1 person, what does it do? And what are you teaching it to do?
Yeah, this is of course a complicated ethical question. I mean, here in Germany we have now an ethical committee which is working on this topic, saying how could we resolve it. I would give you 2 aspects. One is, first of all, the system of autonomous driving will reduce dramatically the deaths on streets. You know, in the US, where there is already some research on this, the US has annually 30,000 people dying on streets. With fully autonomous in place, it will be roughly 5,000. So in general terms, absolutely fantastic. Of course, the 5,000 are still an issue, no doubt about. I personally think that when it comes to this kind of situation, the robot will decide to have the impact at the minimal viable damage, regardless what the minimal viable damage is, which has to be defined. But this will be the decision. And again, it's a valid discussion and we have to have it, but the robot will do it much better than we as humans. Because we talk about now the robot problem, and we are going to have, I know already, heavy discussions when the first robot kills somebody. On the other hand, we don't have these heavy discussions. Every day, drunken people, drunken drivers are killing people every day around the world. And there is no outcry and no big discussion because this is a small thing in a newspaper maybe. So I think overall the system will be much better than we have today.